They found Bryce Kellen's boots on the bank of the Yellowstone River in October of 2007. Size 11 Red Wings, laces still tied, side by side on the gravel. Search and rescue dragged that stretch for 9 days. Never found a body. 2 years later, the county declared him legally dead. 19 years after that, Bryce Kellen walked into Livingston Feed and Supply on a Tuesday morning in March. He was alive. And the sheriff, the same man who ran the original search, was 3 aisles over. I watched Sheriff Wade Hargrove's face drain, his hand locked on a roll of barbed wire. His jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped under the skin. I'm the one who's going to tell you why. My name is Sullivan Pratt. I'm 44 years old, and I've been an electrician in this town for 22 years. Silence costs more than people think. If this story hits you the way it hit me, take a second and subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button too, because what Bryce told me in a parking lot 6 days after he walked back into Livingston, that conversation alone will change how you see every small town you've ever driven through. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I want to know who's out there. Let me take you back to September of 2007, 26 days before those boots showed up on the river. Livingston sits at the mouth of Paradise Valley, right where the Yellowstone bends north toward Big Timber. Population hovers around 8,000, give or take. The kind of place where you can leave your truck running outside the hardware store and nobody thinks twice. I moved there in 2002, after a job rewiring a ranch house turned into a permanent gig. Bought a place on South 5th Street. Small, 2-bedroom, more yard than house. I liked it. I liked the mountains. I liked that my neighbors waved but didn't pry. Bryce Kellen was 28 when I knew him. Worked as a ranch hand for the Peregrine outfit about 11 miles south of town. Tan, quiet, built the way guys get when they move hay bales every day for a decade. He wasn't the kind of person who stood out at a party, but if your fence went down at midnight, Bryce was the guy who'd show up with pliers and not mention it the next day. His mother, Gail, lived on Clark Street. She ran the quilt shop next to the old theater. Everybody knew Gail. Everybody liked Bryce. He was just around, part of the landscape. I'd see him at the Owl Lounge on Friday nights, nursing a Coors and watching whatever game was on. We weren't close friends. We were Livingston friends, the kind where you know someone's truck, know their dog's name, nod when you pass them on Park Street, but you don't know their middle name or what keeps them up at night. That September was dry. The river was low. I remember because I had a job out at a property near Emigrant, and the well pump kept pulling sand. Dust on everything. The cottonwoods along the river were already turning, and it was only the second week of the month. The town felt normal, whatever normal means. The present, March 2026. So that was the Livingston I knew. Now let me jump forward, 19 years forward, to the morning a dead man walked through a door. The morning Bryce walked into that feed store, I didn't recognize him at first. I honest to God thought he was a drifter. His hair was gray at the temples. He had a beard he didn't used to have. His left hand had a tremor. Not bad, but visible if you were looking. And that scar. A raised white line running from his left temple to the back of his ear. Hard to miss. But then he spoke. He asked the kid at the register for a bag of laying mash. And something about his voice, the pitch, the cadence, the way he said, "appreciated," stopped me mid-step. My hands went still on the junction boxes. I set them down on the shelf and walked over. I said, "Bryce?" He looked at me, and the look on his face wasn't relief. It wasn't recognition. It was terror. He said, "Not here." That was it. 2 words. Then he picked up his bag and walked out the front door. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I noticed Hargrove. The sheriff was standing near the back wall, by the fencing supplies. He hadn't moved. His hand was on a roll of barbed wire, and his knuckles were white. He was staring at the door Bryce had just walked through. His lips were moving. No sound coming out. The color hadn't come back to his face. I left without buying anything. Now I need to go back. because what happened to Bryce in 2007, the real version, not the version Hargrove fed the town, that's where this story actually lives. September 18th, 2007, a Thursday. Bryce was supposed to be at the Peregrine Ranch by 6 in the morning for a cattle push. He never showed. His boss at the ranch, the foreman, called his cell at 7. No answer. Called again at 8. Nothing. By noon, the foreman drove to Bryce's rental on Callender Street and found his truck in the driveway, door unlocked. Bryce's wallet was on the kitchen counter. His dog, a blue heeler named Russ, was in the yard. No food, no water. The foreman called the sheriff's office at 12:47 p.m. I know the exact time because it's in the incident report. Deputy took the call. Hargrove showed up personally at Bryce's house by 2 o'clock. That was unusual. The sheriff didn't usually respond to welfare checks. Think about that. I didn't know any of this at the time. I was 40 miles away pulling wire through conduit at a vacation rental. But I heard about it that night at the Owl. Someone said Bryce Kellen was missing. Someone else said his boots were found on the river. The story traveled fast. And the story was simple. Neat. Too neat, if you ask me now. But back then, nobody asked. The official version: Bryce, 28, single, no history of depression that anyone knew of, apparently walked down to the Yellowstone sometime in the early hours of September 18th, took off his boots, and waded into the river. The current took him. His body was never recovered. Case classification: presumed drowning, possible suicide. Gail Kellen didn't believe it. Not for 1 second. She told anyone who'd listen that her son wouldn't do that something happened to him. She went to Hargrove's office 6 times in the first 2 months. Each time Hargrove sat her down and told her the same thing. Gail, I know this is hard, but sometimes people carry things we can't see. The 6th time she brought a photo album, pictures of Bryce at a 4th of July barbecue 2 weeks before he vanished. Smiling, holding a sparkler, arm around his mother. She put the album on Hargrove's desk and said, "Does that look like a man about to walk into a river?" Hargrove closed the album and slid it back to her. And he said, and this is a direct quote, because Gail told me this years later and I never forgot it. He said, "Gail, grief does things to how we remember people. I'd hate to see you build a version of your son that keeps you from healing." That line, 7 years later, I can still feel it in my chest. Not when Bryce vanished. Not when they called off the river search. That moment, when Gail told me what the sheriff said to her face while he knew that Bryce didn't walk into that river. That was when I understood what kind of man we were dealing with. The present again. 4 days after the feed store. So that was 2007. Boots on the river. A mother nobody believed. A sheriff who showed up too fast and cared too little. Now I'm back in March 2026, and I can't sit still. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Bryce Kellen was alive. He was in Livingston, and the sheriff looked like he'd seen a dead man, which, technically, he had. A man he'd had declared dead. I drove around town for 2 days trying to find Bryce. Checked the motels on Park Street, the Murray, the one on the highway, the place near the tracks that rents by the week. Nothing. I sat in my truck in the Albertsons lot for an hour on Friday afternoon, just watching cars go by, thinking maybe I'd see him. The mountains were still white on top. The wind was coming down the valley the way it does in late March. Cold, steady, the kind that makes your eyes water if you face into it. I felt ridiculous. I'm an electrician. I don't follow people. I almost gave up. I actually did give up for about 6 hours. Went home, made dinner, reheated chili from the night before, ate it standing at the counter. Told myself it wasn't my business. Watched the news. Went to bed. Couldn't sleep. Kept seeing Hargrove's face at the feed store. That white. That jaw. Then on Saturday morning, I drove to Gail's house on Clark Street. I hadn't seen Gail in over a year. She'd closed the quilt shop in 2021. Her hands couldn't do the work anymore. She was 81 now. Thin. Used a walker. The house smelled like lavender oil and something medicinal I couldn't place. She opened the door and she looked at me and she said, "You saw him." I said, "Yeah." She said, "He's staying in the back room. He doesn't want anyone to know he's here." I said, "Gail, why is he here?" And she said, "Because I'm dying, Sullivan. Pancreatic. He came home to see me." I sat at her kitchen table for an hour. The table had a cloth on it, one of her quilts cut down to size, blue and yellow. Bryce didn't come out of the back room the whole time. Gail made tea she barely touched. Her hands shook, putting the kettle on. She told me Bryce had been living in Bend, Oregon for the last 19 years. Different name, different life. He'd worked at a lumber yard, then a hardware store. Never married, never came back. Never called anyone in Livingston except her. And those calls only started in 2019 from a burner phone, once a month. I asked her why he left. She said, "Ask him yourself. He won't tell me everything. I think he's afraid of what I'd do." Have you ever watched someone grieve for a loss that didn't have to happen? Not a car accident, not a disease. A loss that someone caused and then walked away from. The kind of grief that doesn't fade because it doesn't have an answer. If you have, you know what I saw in Gail Kellen's face for 19 years. And what I was seeing now, sitting across from an 81-year-old woman who finally had her son back and was running out of time to keep him. Drop that in the comments. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who's seen it. Because what Bryce told me in the next room, that's where this whole thing breaks open. I sat with that for a while. Then I knocked on the back room door. No answer for maybe 30 seconds. Then the door opened and there was Bryce Kellen, 19 years older. That scar, that tremor in his left hand. Eyes that looked like they hadn't really rested since 2007. He looked at me and said, "I remember you. You're the electrician." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You can't tell anyone I'm here." I said, "Bryce, half of Livingston saw you walk into the feed store on Tuesday." He closed his eyes, just stood there with his eyes closed for a few seconds. Then he said, "I shouldn't have come back." Back to 2007, October. The search for Bryce lasted 9 days. Dive team from Gallatin County, 2 boats, thermal imaging on the river surface. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no personal effects beyond the boots. Now, Gail had tried everything in those early weeks. She'd gone to Hargrove's office, I told you about that. But she also did something else. She hired a private investigator from Billings, paid him $6,200, which was most of what she had in her savings. He came down, spent 3 weeks talking to people. Gail told me about it years later. She said the man was thorough, asked good questions, seemed like he cared. She said he told her he'd get to the bottom of it. She believed him. His report came back 12 pages long. It said the evidence was consistent with drowning, that Bryce had exhibited isolation behaviors in the weeks before his disappearance, whatever that means, that there was no evidence of foul play. Case closed from his end. I didn't learn until 2026, when I was pulling on every thread I could find, that the PI's daughter worked as a dispatcher for Park County, for Hargrove's department. I'm not saying that's why the report said what it said. I'm saying Gail never had a fair shot. Every door she opened led back to the same room. Deputy Carla Voss, she'd been with the department about 3 years at that point. She told me something once, years later, that stuck. She said when she processed Bryce's house, she noticed his toothbrush was gone. His overnight bag was gone. His passport, which he kept in a fireproof box under his bed because Gail had told him to, was gone. But his wallet was on the counter. She wrote it up, included it in her supplemental report. She said, "Missing person who takes his passport and toothbrush but leaves his wallet doesn't sound like a drowning to me." She filed the report on October 3rd, 2007. It never made it into the case file. Someone pulled it. She never found out who, but there were only 2 people with access to that filing system, Hargrove and his office manager. She kept a copy. Smart woman. She kept a copy in her glove box for 2 years. I didn't know that then. Nobody did. Carla left the department in 2009, moved to Bozeman, joined the State Highway Patrol. She never talked about it publicly, but she kept that copy. And then there was the memorial. The town held a service at the community center in late October. Hargrove stood at the front and spoke for maybe 4 minutes, measured, sincere sounding. He called Bryce a good young man who slipped through the cracks of a hard life. and a mother who cried in the third pew and didn't believe a word of it. I went to that memorial, sat in the back. I watched Hargrove put his hand on Gail's shoulder when he was done speaking. That image stayed with me. I didn't know why at the time. I just remember thinking, something about his hand on her shoulder didn't look right, like he was holding her down instead of holding her up. The town stopped talking about Bryce by Thanksgiving. That's how it works in a place like Livingston. People grieve, and then they move on, because the cattle still need feeding and the snow's coming and life doesn't stop for a missing ranch hand who probably walked into the river. But Gail didn't stop, and I didn't stop watching her not stop. Present, March 2026. Bryce sat on the edge of the bed in Gail's back room. I pulled a chair from the hallway. The room was small, a single bed, a dresser with a lamp on it, a window that looked out at the fence line. Smelled like mothballs and something else. Camphor, maybe. The lamp had a pull chain and it threw a yellow circle on the ceiling. He told me. Not everything, not that first night, but enough. He started with the morning, then backed up, then jumped forward again. I had to ask him twice to slow down. His hands were in his lap and the tremor in the left one got worse when he talked about certain parts. September 17th, 2007, the night before he vanished. Bryce had been driving back from a fence repair on the south end of the Peregrine property. It was after 10, dark. He took the old Swingley Road shortcut because the main route had construction flagging. About 2 miles past the Bridger Creek Bridge, he saw a truck pulled off into the grass. A county truck, sheriff's department markings. And he saw Wade Hargrove standing behind it, hosing something off the front bumper. Not water. The hose was running red. Bryce slowed down. Hargrove saw his headlights. Bryce tried to keep driving, but Hargrove stepped into the road and flagged him down. Bryce stopped. Hargrove walked to his window, and the sheriff said, "Bryce, I need you to forget you drove this road tonight." Bryce said, "What happened?" Hargrove looked back at the truck. Then he looked at Bryce and said, "An animal hit the grill. Deer. I'm cleaning it up." But Bryce could see the bumper, and the damage wasn't right for a deer. The impact point was too low, and on the passenger seat of the county truck, Bryce saw a jacket. Small, purple. It had a name stitched inside the collar in white thread. Bryce couldn't read the full name in the dark, but he saw the first 4 letters. He stopped talking here. He put his hand over his face. I waited. He said, "I'm sorry. I need a second." Then he took his hand down and said the letters. T-E-S-S. He didn't say anything else that night about the road. He jumped ahead. To the morning, he said. The next morning he came to my house. September 18th. Before he could decide what to do, Hargrove showed up at his house. Not in the county truck, in his personal vehicle. A silver Dodge Ram. He was at Bryce's door by 5:15 a.m. What happened next? Bryce told me this sitting on that bed with his hands shaking, is that the sheriff came inside, closed the door, and beat him. Not a shoving match, not a warning. Hargrove hit him with something. Bryce thinks it was a flashlight or a baton, across the left side of his head. Bryce went down. Hargrove hit him again, and again. Bryce said he blacked out. When he woke up, he was on his kitchen floor, blood on the linoleum. His left ear was ringing. It still rings 19 years later. He couldn't see straight. His dog was barking outside, and Hargrove was gone. But Bryce's passport was gone too. His overnight bag, his toothbrush. Bryce said he lay there for maybe an hour. Then he got up, wrapped his head in a towel, walked out the back door, crossed 2 properties, and got to the highway. He hitchhiked south, made it to Idaho by nightfall. He kept going, didn't stop until Bend. He said he was too scared to come back. He said he knew Hargrove would kill him if he did. He said 19 years went by, and he never stopped hearing that ringing in his left ear. I sat in that chair and I didn't say anything for a long time. If you saw what Bryce saw on that road, a man you trusted washing blood off a bumper at 10 o'clock at night, and that man beat you unconscious in your own kitchen the next morning, would you have run? Or would you have stayed and fought? I still don't know what I would have done. I'd like to think I'd have stayed, but I'd be lying if I said I was sure. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it. Because what I found out next, about that jacket, about that girl, that's where this goes from a missing person case to something I still have nightmares about. 2007 to 2008. What I didn't know. While the town was mourning Bryce Kellen's drowning, something else was happening that nobody connected. August 2007, 3 weeks before Bryce vanished. A 17-year-old named Tessa Ridnour went missing from her family's place outside Clyde Park, about 20 miles east of Livingston. She'd been walking home from a friend's house on a county road, late afternoon. The sun was still up. She never arrived. Her parents reported her missing the next morning. Search went on for 5 days. Found nothing. The case was assigned to, you already know, Sheriff Wade Hargrove's department. It was classified as a runaway. Tessa had gotten in trouble at school the previous spring, caught with a vape pen, suspended for 2 days. Hargrove cited behavioral indicators of a teen in crisis in the case summary. Her parents begged him to reclassify it. He refused. A 2-day suspension for a vape pen. That was his evidence that a 17-year-old girl chose to disappear from her own life. Tessa Ridnour was never found. She'd been on the volleyball team at Park High. She had a part-time job at the Dairy Queen in Livingston, worked there 2 afternoons a week. Her father, Court, raised cattle on 80 acres outside Clyde Park. Her mother taught 2nd grade at the elementary school. They were not people whose daughter ran away, but Hargrove said she did. And in 2007, the sheriff's word was the last word. Now here's what I need you to understand. In 2007, I didn't connect these two things. Nobody did. A missing teenager classified as a runaway. A missing ranch hand presumed drowned. Different cases, different circumstances, different parts of the county. The only thread between them was the sheriff's office. But Bryce connected them. Sitting on that bed in Gale's back room in 2026, he told me what he'd been carrying for 19 years. The jacket on the passenger seat of Hargrove's truck that night on Swingley Road. Small, purple, TESS. And I need to stop here for a second, because when he told me that, I thought he had to be wrong. That's where my head went first. I sat back in the chair and I thought, it was dark, he was driving. He saw 4 letters through a truck window. Maybe it said Tess, maybe it said Tesla, maybe it was a brand name. Maybe he's misremembering 19 years later. I held on to that for about 48 hours. Told myself he could have been wrong. Went to work, ran conduit at a remodel on 8th Street, came home, sat in my kitchen. There was a moment, Wednesday night I think, when I almost talked myself out of it. I thought, Bryce took a beating that morning. He had a head injury. He was driving at night. Memory does things after trauma. Maybe he saw a jacket and his brain filled in the letters later, after he heard about Tessa. Maybe the whole thing was a circuit that only connected in hindsight. I actually felt relief for about 20 minutes. I ate dinner. I washed the plate. I sat down. Then I thought about the blood on the bumper, the hose, the fact that Hargrove was washing his own county truck at 10 o'clock at night on a back road. You don't wash a deer strike at 10 p.m. on Swingley Road. You drive to the car wash in the morning, and the bumper damage was low. Bryce said the impact point was below the headlights. A deer hits at hood height. A person walking on a road hits at bumper height. The relief was gone, just like that, replaced by something worse than doubt. He wasn't wrong. Subscribe. If you've made it this far, hit that button now. Present. Late March 2026. I started digging. Quietly. I didn't go to the sheriff's department. I didn't call the state police. I didn't tell anyone except one person. Delia Orozco. She was a nurse at Livingston Healthcare, had been for over 30 years. She lived on View Vista Drive, about a mile from me. I'd rewired her garage in 2019, and we'd stayed friendly. Coffee once a month, that kind of thing. She was 63, sharp, careful with her words, the kind of person who notices everything and says very little. I went to her because of something she told me once, back in 2020, during one of those garage coffees. She'd said, offhand, almost like she was talking to herself, "This town has a longer memory than people think. The problem is, the wrong people are in charge of what gets remembered. At the time, I thought she was talking about politics. Now, I wasn't sure. I sat at her kitchen table on a Wednesday evening and told her about Bryce, about the feed store, about what he said in Gail's back room. I told her about the truck, the bumper, the letters on the jacket. Her face didn't change. She didn't gasp. She didn't lean forward. She set her coffee down, placed it on the table carefully, like she was thinking about where exactly it should go. Then she was quiet for a while. I could hear her kitchen clock ticking. I said, "Delia, say something." She said, "Why are you coming to me with this?" I said, "Because you know things about this town that other people don't." She said, "That's not a reason, that's a guess." I said, "Okay, then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me there's nothing to this, and I'll go home." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Gail called me last week. I know he's back." She picked up her coffee again, put it back down. "I treated a head wound on a ranch hand in September of 2007 that was never reported to the hospital. He came to my house at midnight. I cleaned it, bandaged it, and told him he needed a CT scan. He was gone by morning." I stared at her. She said, "I've been waiting 19 years for someone to ask me about this, Sullivan. I wasn't the only one either. There are others in this town who know pieces. They just never had anyone to tell." That's the thing about small towns. The silence isn't empty. It's full. It's full of people who saw things, people who treated wounds, people who filed reports that disappeared. The silence is made of knowledge, and it sits there year after year until someone opens the door. A wire can carry current for decades, and nobody checks it. Doesn't mean it's dead. Delia told me she'd kept a journal. Not a formal document, a personal notebook where she recorded every patient she treated outside the hospital. Dates, injuries, her clinical observations. She'd started doing it in 2003, after a liability scare. She went to her bedroom closet and came back with a composition notebook, the kind with the marbled black and white cover. The spine was cracked. The pages were yellow at the edges. September 18th, 2007, page 43. Her handwriting, small and precise. Male, late 20s, presented with blunt force trauma to left temporal region. Laceration approximately 4 inches, deep to fascia. Possible orbital fracture. Patient refused ER. States he fell. Inconsistent with mechanism. Cleaned and closed with butterfly strips. Advised CT. Patient left 0200 hours. She never reported it. She told me she was afraid. That Hargrove had connections at the hospital. His brother-in-law sat on the board. That she didn't want to end up like the people who asked questions in this town. Sidelined, discredited, quietly pushed out. I asked her, "Did you ever think about telling someone?" She looked at me and said, "Every time I drove past Gail's house for 19 years, I thought about it. Every single time." She paused. "You want to know the worst part? Gail waved at me. Every time. She'd be on her porch, and she'd wave, and I'd wave back." I need to back up again. 2009. After Bryce was declared legally dead, Gail Kellen tried one more time. She hired a private investigator from Billings. I already told you about that. The $6,200, the 12-page report, the PI's daughter working dispatch for Hargrove's department. Every door led back to the same room. But something else happened in 2009 that I didn't learn about until I started digging in 2026. Tessa Ridnour's father, Court Ridnour, came to the sheriff's office on January 7th, 2009. He had a theory. He'd been reading about other missing persons cases in Montana, and he noticed something. 2 other girls, both under 20, had disappeared along county roads within 40 miles of Livingston between 2004 and 2007. He asked Hargrove to reopen Tessa's case and look at the 3 disappearances together. Hargrove's response is in the public record. He wrote a memo, I've seen it, that reads, "Mr. Ridnour's concerns were heard and evaluated. The 3 cases referenced involve different jurisdictions, different circumstances, and different age demographics. There is no evidentiary basis for connecting them. Case 07-4419, Ridnour, T., remains classified. Runaway. 3 girls, 3 county roads, 3 years, and the sheriff saw no connection. I heard something about Hargrove, secondhand from Carla Voss, when I talked to her in 2026. She said that after Court Ridnour's visit to the office in 2009, Hargrove told the deputy, loud enough for the office to hear, "Court Ridnour's been reading too much internet. Next thing he'll be telling me aliens took her. Some parents can't accept that their kids didn't want to come home." That was about a man's missing 17-year-old daughter, said with a coffee cup in his hand, in front of staff. Now I need to pause, because the easy version of this story is that Hargrove was evil, that he was a monster. And maybe he was, but I sat across from this man dozens of times over the years, at community meetings, at the diner, at the hardware store. He coached Little League. He brought his wife flowers at the hospital when she had her knee replaced. He remembered my name every time he saw me and asked about my wiring jobs. Once at a church fundraiser, I saw him standing alone by his truck after everyone had gone inside, just standing there, looking at the building, not going in. I don't know what that was. I'm not saying it means anything, but I saw it. That's what makes it worse. He wasn't a stranger. He was the sheriff. He was supposed to be the one holding it together. And the thing I couldn't stop thinking, did he hit Tessa Ridnour with that truck? Did he run down a 17-year-old girl on a county road? Or did someone else do it, and he covered it up? I didn't know. Not yet. I think there's a moment in everyone's life, if you're lucky it never comes, where you have to decide if the truth is worth what it's going to cost you. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about the town you live in, the people you see every day, the version of your life that only works if you don't look too hard at what's underneath. Have you ever stood at that line? That line where you know that if you step over it, nothing goes back to how it was. Tell me in the comments, because I was standing right on it. And Gail didn't have much time left. The hospice nurse was coming 3 times a week now. If this was going to mean anything, it had to mean something soon. And I stepped over. Present, April 2026. I spent 3 weeks building a case, quietly. I'm an electrician, not a detective, but I know how to trace a circuit. I know how to follow a line from one point to another and find where the break is. Here's what I did. First, I got Bryce to write a sworn statement, 11 pages, handwritten. Every detail he could remember about the night of September 17th, 2007. The truck, the hose, the bumper, the jacket, the letters on the collar, the beating the next morning, the flashlight or baton, the ringing in his ear. 19 years in Bend. His mother's diagnosis, why he came back. His handwriting was shaky. Some of it I had to ask him to rewrite because I couldn't read it. Then I got Delia's journal. She photocopied the relevant pages, September 18th, 2007, and wrote a supplemental statement describing what she saw and why she didn't report it. Third, I called Carla Voss, the former deputy. She was living in Bozeman, still with the highway patrol. I'd gotten her number through a friend of a friend. She didn't answer the first 2 times. The third time, she picked up. I said, "Carla, this is Sullivan Pratt from Livingston. I need to talk to you about the Bryce Kellen case." Silence. 10 seconds. Then she said, "Is he alive?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I knew it." Quiet. Then, "I filed a supplemental in 2007. It disappeared from the case file." She agreed to write a new statement. She faxed it to me the next day from a FedEx in Bozeman. 3 pages. The missing toothbrush, the passport, the overnight bag. Her original assessment, Bryce Kellen's disappearance was not consistent with drowning or suicide. Fourth, and this was the one that changed everything, I went to the county records office in the courthouse. I was looking for the incident reports from August and September 2007. Specifically, any motor vehicle incident involving a county-owned vehicle. Actually, sorry, I need to back up. Before the county records, I tried something else first that went nowhere. I called the Montana Highway Patrol, hoping they'd have an independent log of county vehicle incidents. The woman who answered transferred me 3 times. The last person I talked to said those records would be at the county level. Dead end. I hung up and sat in my truck for 10 minutes wondering if I was wasting my time. If maybe Bryce was wrong and I was an electrician chasing shadows. Then I drove to the courthouse. The clerk, a young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, pulled the maintenance logs for all county vehicles for that period. She was helpful. She had no idea what she was handing me. On the log for Vehicle 14, a 2005 Ford F250 assigned to the sheriff's office, there was an entry dated September 19, 2007, one day after Bryce vanished. The entry read, "Front bumper damage. Cause, animal strike. Repaired at Garrett's Body Shop, Livingston. Authorized by W. Hargrove." I drove to Garrett's. The shop had changed hands twice since 2007, but auto body shops keep records. Insurance requires it. The woman running the shop now let me look through the storage room in the back. Took me 2 hours. Filing cabinets from the floor to the ceiling, most of them unlabeled. I opened every drawer from 2006 to 2008. Found receipts for brake jobs, paint matches, hail damage claims. Nothing from the sheriff's office. I almost walked out. Then I checked a cardboard box on the bottom shelf behind the last cabinet. It was labeled MISC 07-08. The work order was in there. Folded in half, coffee stain on the corner. September 21st, 2007. Vehicle 14, front bumper replacement and grille repair. Notes from the technician, a man who'd since retired, read, "Damage inconsistent with stated cause. Impact pattern suggests object struck at bumper height, not hood. Paint transfer on grille. Purple fabric embedded in chrome seam. Photographed per shop policy." Purple fabric? In the grille? I asked the woman if the shop still had the photos. She said everything from before 2015 was on a hard drive in the office. She let me look. It took another hour. But the folder was there. September 2007. 4 photographs. One of them showed the grille of that county truck up close. And caught in the chrome, clear as day, was a strip of purple nylon fabric. I saved the photos to a USB drive. I drove home. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for maybe 20 minutes. My hands were steady. That scared me more than anything. A 17-year-old girl. I kept thinking that. 17. I had it. Not all of it, but enough. I didn't go to Hargrove. I didn't go to the Livingston Police Department either. Too close, too connected. I went to the Montana Division of Criminal Investigation in Helena. I drove there on a Wednesday morning. 3 hours and 14 minutes. I brought everything. Rice's statement, Delia's journal pages and supplemental, Carla Voss's faxed statement, the body shop work order, the photographs from the hard drive, and one more thing. A printout from the Park County Assessor's office showing that Wade Hargrove had purchased a 12-acre parcel on Pine Creek Road in November 2007, 2 months after Bryce vanished, and 1 month after the river search ended. The parcel was undeveloped. No structure, no improvements. 12 acres of grass and trees, and nothing. A man who owned a 4-bedroom house in town suddenly needed 12 empty acres. I met with a DCI investigator. An agent, maybe 40, short hair, no jewelry. She listened to everything I said without interrupting for 45 minutes. She looked at every document. She held the body shop photographs under her desk lamp and studied them for a long time. The office had fluorescent lights that buzzed. Industrial carpet, gray, with a water stain near the window. A filing cabinet with a plant on top that needed watering. Then she said, "How long have you been working on this?" I said, 3 weeks. She said, "An electrician?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Mr. Pratt, I'm going to need you to leave everything with me. I'm going to need you to go home and not tell anyone you are here. Can you do that?" I said I could. She said, "There's something you should know. We received a tip in 2012, anonymous, by mail, suggesting the Ridnour case should be re-examined. We opened a preliminary review, but without a witness or physical evidence, we couldn't move forward. It sat in a file." She looked at me. "You just brought us both. That hit me. Someone in 2012, someone I didn't know, had tried. And it hadn't been enough. And if Bryce hadn't come back to see his dying mother, it might never have been enough. She said, "We'll be in touch." I drove home. I didn't tell Bryce. I didn't tell Delia. I didn't tell anyone. I went back to work. I pulled wire and ran conduit and ate lunch in my truck and waited. I want to tell you those 11 days were fine. They weren't. I couldn't focus. I wired a junction box wrong on the second day, reversed the hot and neutral, which I haven't done since I was an apprentice. My foreman noticed. I blamed it on a headache. I went home every night and sat in my kitchen and looked at the phone. I drove past Hargrove's office twice, not on purpose, just because my route took me past it. And both times I gripped the wheel and kept my eyes forward. I kept thinking, what if they don't believe me? What if the file disappears again? What if Hargrove finds out I was in Helena? On the 9th day, Bryce called me from Gail's phone. He said, "Someone's been driving past the house. Silver truck. Slow." I told him to stay inside. I didn't sleep that night. On the 11th day, the DCI agent called me. She said, "The fabric sample from the body shop photographs has been matched to the jacket Tessa Rittenauer was wearing the night she disappeared. Her mother provided a description to us in 2007. Purple North Face, size small. Her initials stitched inside the collar. It matches." I pulled my truck over. I was on 9th Street near the bridge. I put it in park, and I put my forehead on the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. I couldn't breathe right for about 30 seconds. A 17-year-old girl, walking home from a friend's house. Purple jacket. And she'd been under 12 acres of grass for 19 years, while the man who put her there coached Little League and shook hands at church. She said, "We're executing a search warrant on the Pine Creek Road property tomorrow morning. I wanted you to know." I said, "Thank you." I don't think she heard me. I'm not sure I said it out loud.
They found her.
April 29th, 2026. A cadaver dog hit on a spot about 60 yards from the tree line on that 12-acre parcel. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. The anomaly was at 4 feet. Tessa Rittenauer had been in that ground for nearly 19 years. The forensic anthropologist confirmed the remains were female, consistent with age 17 to 19 at time of death. Dental records matched. The cause of death, per the preliminary autopsy, was blunt force trauma to the torso and pelvis consistent with a high-speed vehicle impact. She'd been hit by a truck, and she'd been buried on land the sheriff bought a month later. Wade Hargrove was arrested at his home on South Yellowstone Street on April 30th, 2026, at 6:17 a.m. The charges? Second-degree murder, concealment of a homicide, felony assault, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and filing false reports across 2 cases. I wasn't there for the arrest. The DCI agent told me about it later. She said Hargrove answered the door in his bathrobe. She said when they told him the charges, he sat down on his front step and didn't say a word for 3 minutes. 3 minutes. She said the agent stood there and waited. Nobody spoke. The sprinkler was running on the lawn next door. That was the only sound. Then he said, "I want a lawyer." That was it. 19 years of looking Gail Kellen in the eye. 19 years of telling Court Rittenauer his daughter chose to leave. 19 years of handshakes and community meetings and, "That's our sheriff." And at the end, sitting on a step in a bathrobe. I want a lawyer. I wasn't home when I heard. I was at a job site on the north end of town, running wire through a crawl space. My phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it kept buzzing. I backed out of the crawl space and looked at the screen. 6 texts. A missed call from Delia. A news alert from the Bozeman Daily. I sat down on the porch of that house. The homeowner wasn't there. It was just me and the toolbox and the mountains and the news on my phone. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the wood and I sat there. I don't know how long. 10 minutes? Maybe more? I wasn't thinking about the case or the evidence or the arrest. I was thinking about Gail waving at Delia from her porch. I was thinking about Court Rittenauer standing in Hargrove's office with his theory about 3 girls and being told he read too much internet. I was thinking about Bryce driving south through Idaho with a towel wrapped around his head and blood running down his neck. I cried. I'm not someone who cries.
But I sat on that porch, and I cried, and I couldn't stop for a while. The news hit Livingston by noon. I heard about it again at the Owl that evening. Bartender had the TV on. Local out of Bozeman was running it live. I saw a woman I recognized from church sitting in her car in the parking lot of Albertsons, just sitting there, not moving. I didn't know her name. I just stood there and watched her for a second, and then I walked inside. Because it wasn't just the sheriff. It was everything the sheriff represented. 26 years of trust, and underneath it, a dead girl and a beaten man, and a mother who spent 2 decades being told she was imagining things. The thing that got me, the thing I keep coming back to, is that Hargrove wasn't some outsider. He was from here. His family had been in Park County since the 1940s. He knew everyone. He went to the same church as Gail. He ate at the same diner as Court Ridnour. He looked these people in the eye every single day for 19 years. That takes something I don't have a word for. It's not courage. It's not evil. It's something cold and steady that lives in a person who can smile at the mother of a girl he buried and sleep just fine that night. It's been 5 months now. The arrest was a Wednesday. By Friday, the county commission had suspended Hargrove. By the following Monday, the undersheriff resigned. Not charged with anything, but he said he couldn't stay. 2 deputies transferred out within the month. The state sent an interim sheriff from Missoula. Hargrove's trial is set for October. He's been denied bail. Flight risk given the severity of the charges. He's in the Gallatin County Detention Center. His wife left Livingston in May, sold the house. Nobody knows where she went. I don't blame her. Gail's quilt shop. The building is still there on Clark Street, next to the old theater. The woman who bought it turned it into a coffee place. I went in once, right after the arrest. Stood inside for a minute. The walls were different, the fabric tables were gone, but the light came through the front window the same way.
Court Ridnour, Tessa's father. He came to the courthouse the day of the arraignment. He sat in the front row. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just sat there, hands folded, staring at the man who told him his daughter ran away. When they led Hargrove out in handcuffs, Court stood up. That was all. He just stood up. And Hargrove looked at him for 1 second, and then looked at the floor. Bryce is still in Livingston. He moved in with Gail full-time. She's in hospice care now. The cancer is moving fast. He sits with her every day. He told me last week that he reads to her from the same books she used to read to him when he was a kid. He said sometimes she falls asleep in the middle of a chapter, and he just keeps reading. Carla Voss was asked to testify at the preliminary hearing. She drove down from Bozeman. I saw her in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked at me and said, "It took 16 years too long." I said, "I know." She said, "I kept that report in my glove box for 2 years before I moved it to a file cabinet. I looked at it every time I changed my oil. That's not nothing. That's someone who refused to let a thing die." Delia retired from the hospital last month. She told me she sleeps better now. I believe her. I see Bryce at the hardware store sometimes. He nods. We don't talk about the case. There's not much to say right now. The lawyers will do their part. The courts will do theirs. I think about Tessa. I think about her a lot. She was 17. She was walking home from a friend's house on a Thursday night in August. She had a purple jacket with her name stitched inside the collar. She had parents who loved her. She had a life that was just starting. And one man with a badge and 12 empty acres, decided that his reputation was worth more than her life, more than Bryce's life, more than Gail's sanity, more than Court's right to bury his daughter. I go to the feed store on Tuesdays now. Same time Bryce walked in that morning. I don't know why, I just do. I buy what I need and I stand in that aisle for a second, and I think about the look on Hargrove's face when he saw a dead man come through the door. The truth is patient. It doesn't care about your badge, your reputation, your 12 acres. It just waits. And if you've listened this far, honestly, thank you. This is the hardest thing I've ever talked about. Harder than living through it in some ways. I started this story because I believe that when someone speaks up, it matters. It mattered when Gail went to that office 6 times. It mattered when Carla kept that report. It mattered when Delia opened her closet and pulled out a notebook. None of them knew it would lead here.
but it did. So if this story meant something to you, if it made you think about the silences in your own town, the questions that went quiet too fast, subscribe to this channel. I mean it. And leave a like because it helps more than you know. I want to ask you something and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments. Is there a silence in your life? Something you've seen, something you know, that's been sitting too long? You don't have to name it, just tell me it's there. Because I've learned something from all of this. The people who listened to Gail really listened. They were the ones who made this possible. Listening isn't nothing. It might be everything. There's another story waiting for you right over there, and I think you'll understand why I chose it. My name is Sullivan Pratt. I'm 44 years old. I'm an electrician in Livingston, Montana, and I'm telling you, some people come back.